Obviously, retiring is a super big deal and you want to get it right. You want to do it well. And so in this video, what we're doing is we're going through a bit of a checklist, some to-dos, some things to take care of before you retire. Number 1, save hard. Yes, I know this is pretty obvious and self-explanatory, but at the same point, this is really when all of the dollars matter. And you don't just want to save money, although obviously that's something that you do want to do, but you also want to save the amount of taxes that you pay. And you also want to save yourself from unnecessary expenses. During this period, you want to be super intentional and fire on all cylinders. This is the home stretch. Number 2, smash debt. Yes, you can carry debt into retirement, but it is not ideal at all. And now I know it's not always possible for everyone, but if it is possible for you, you want to eliminate all of the debt that you can before you retire. Yes, even mortgage debt. Because not only does it require you to have a bigger income so that you can make the payments, which usually means that you have to pull more money out of your cash and investments to make it happen, which in turn drains them quicker, but it's also an emotional weight on you throughout your retirement. It is a literal and total drag. Now, of course, as with most things, there can be exceptions to the rule, such as having a rental property where the income more than offsets the mortgage payments that you have. But even then, you got to be careful and make sure you have big fat safety margins built in, because as we've seen, interest rates do not ask for your permission before they move. Number 3, build a war chest. If you haven't seen my video on having solid cash reserves, also known as a war chest, then I highly recommend you do. But basically, the moral of the story is that having a solid chunk of money that is not invested in anything volatile and that is totally accessible to you at a moment's notice, such as something like a high-interest savings account, is very wise. Not only can this save you in times of trouble, but just knowing that you have it, knowing that you have the safety margin available, does a ton for you psychologically throughout retirement. It is a de-stressor, big time, and I highly recommend that you build a juicy one before you retire. Number 4, pay for big upcoming expenses up front. If you have a roof that needs fixing or a deck that needs replacing, or if you know that you have a vehicle purchase that you want to make for early in retirement, pay for those things in advance of retiring. Now, you don't literally need to actually pay for them before you retire, but make sure that you have the cash set aside for those expenses that you have coming up. Now, as with many things, there can be exceptions to the rule here as well. Like, let's say you plan on downsizing right after you retire. Well, normally in that process, you're going to end up with a big injection of cash into your situation. So that could fund a bunch of those goals. Or maybe you know that you have an inheritance coming. Be careful with that one. But if you know that it's for sure coming soon, then you could set aside the cash mentally for those expenses that you have coming up. But the point is, take care of what you know is coming before you turn the paychecks off. Number 5, figure out what you're going to do with your time. This is actually a big deal. There is plenty of research that shows that when you transition from working to retirement, it can have serious effects on you mentally, emotionally, physically, etc. So it is wise to come up with a game plan for what you plan to do with all of this newfound free time. Things that give you purpose, enjoyment, physical activity, and human engagement. Make plans to travel, volunteer, dive into your hobbies, start a business that you enjoy, invest time into your family, whatever. Basically, stay engaged and do not fade away. The degree to which you do this and plan to do this will definitely affect how much joy you get out of this stage of your life. Number 6, nail down the budget. Now, this can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're like me and you've never lived by a budget before. But either way, you need to know at least a reasonably good estimate of what you expect to spend. Otherwise, how will you ever know if you have enough to pull it off? I'll include a link below to a free budget planner that you can use if you like. Now, budgeting is pretty self-explanatory, so I don't want to beat it with the stick here, but I will say this. Most people do not spend a static amount all the way through their retirement. Now, there is inflation that you have to factor in, but in real terms, after inflation is taken out, what we see is that most people actually start to spend less as they age. In the retirement plans that we build, it is really common for us to build out a go-go stage where you're up to more, you're spending more, you're doing more, a slow-go phase where you start to wind things down and spend a bit less, and no-go phase, which in this period you may have higher health costs, but now you're not spending money on pretty much anything else. Of course, you can tweak this to your own needs and plan for however you want, but the fact is, you do want to make sure that you include this kind of thinking in your planning because it can make a dramatic difference in how much cash flow you actually have throughout your retirement, especially during the earlier years where you typically want to spend more. Number 7, test your budget. This is a very good idea. You want to make sure that your budget is doable. So if at all possible, a year or two before you retire, you want to start living off of what you expect your budget to be in retirement. Now, obviously, if you find that very doable, then that's awesome. But if you find it not doable, then you need to recalibrate. And even if you do need to recalibrate and have to readjust and rethink things, that is a way better thing to do before you retire than after you retire and start running out of money. Number 8, think through your work pension and group RRSP options. If you're lucky enough to have a pension at work or a matching group RRSP, then you definitely want to carve out some time to make sure that you know what kind of plan you have, how it works, and what your options are at retirement. Defined benefit pensions. These are the holy grails of pensions because they promise a certain amount of money for the rest of your life. But there are a number of options and different details that can affect the amount that you will actually get, such as the amount your spouse will get when you pass away, the amount of time that your pension is guaranteed for, when you plan to start taking it, whether it's indexed to grow with inflation, etc. With many of these plans, you actually even have the option of transferring out the full cash value of them so that you could manage them on your own if you want to. Now, I almost never recommend that somebody do that, but the point is you want to know what your options are so that you can figure out what the right move for you is. Defined contribution pensions and group RRSPs. Now, these plans are great too, but the amount that you will get from them is not guaranteed. The amount that you will get is actually just a function of how much money went into the plan over the years and the different investment choices that you picked along the way. An important thing to note here is that these plans can actually get really quite big over time. And when you retire, they'll just sit there and they'll just stay in the investments that you had them in unless you do something about it yourself or unless you transfer them out. Now, there's a chance that all of that could work out for you, but there's also a chance that dealing with a 1-800 number for something that is this important to your future can get very old very quick. So you may want to look at moving these funds to a competent firm that you trust to manage the money for you, or even to a platform where you can manage them yourself. The last thing I want to mention here is about defined contribution pensions specifically. Once you are done being employed by a company, these pensions roll over into a locked-in account, which is pretty much the same as an RSP, but there are just some additional rules for when and how you can access them. But depending on a few different factors in the province that they're registered in, you may be able to unlock some or all of it, which is great. So again, just know what you have and know your options. Number 9, know your public pension plans. In Canada, we have 2 primary public pension plans. We have the Canada Pension Plan, or CPP, and Old Age Security, or OAS. With both of these plans, you have options for when you can start taking them. And what you choose will definitely have an impact on how much money you'll get out of them for the rest of your life. But it is not just about the dollar amount. There's quite a bit at play here, such as what other accounts you have, other sources of income. So you really want to think through the timing of your CPP and OAS benefits very carefully. Now, I've done a full deep dive video on CPP and OAS that will tell you everything you need to know, so I'm not going to repeat it all here. I'll just put a link below so that you can check it out anytime you like. And I'll also post a link below to Service Canada so that you can find out your estimated benefits for these plans if you want to. Number 10, figure out how much money you'll need. Now, once you have your budget, you need to figure out if you have enough cash and investments to actually fund it. And this can get a little bit complicated because you have to tally up all the regular sources of retirement income that you expect to have, such as pension income, CPP, OAS, rental income, etc. And then you need to figure out what the difference is between all of those sources and how much money you actually want each month. And this will tell you how much you need to pull out from your cash and investments each month. For instance, if you need $6,000 each month and your pension incomes total $4,000, and those are the only other sources of retirement income that you have, well then you know that you need to take $2,000 from your investments to top you up. But then you need to factor in inflation, and you have to make sure that you actually have enough cash and investments to make it all the way through your retirement. So yes, it can get a little bit tricky, but don't worry, I have a detailed video on how you can figure all of this out as well. The link is below. 11, build out a tax strategy. Okay, this one is next level, and this is something that we do for clients all of the time. Basically, you can save a ton in taxes and therefore give yourself way more cash flow to work with throughout retirement if you carefully think through how much to pull from which account and when. Now, we have lots of videos on this as well, but that's because it's such a big deal, especially when you marry it with strategic CPP and OAS timing, which you should do. For some people, taking more money from their RRSPs early can be great. But for others, it can be better to blend the income from multiple different accounts to make sure that they stay below certain aggressive tax rates. But everyone's situation is different, and so you want to make sure that you figure out the right way to do it for yourself. And sometimes it can be different in the first phase of retirement than it is in the later ones. But regardless, thinking it out properly is a big deal and can lead to significant increases in your retirement cash flow and your estate value. No doubt about it. Number 12, stress test your plan. Now, it's wonderful to build a big, shiny, pretty retirement plan and get all of your ducks in a row. But if you don't throw some hard times at your plan and see how it holds up under the pressure, then there's a decent chance that you're just building your plans on sand, which is not something that you want to do with a multi-decade income plan that leads you into some of your most vulnerable years. What we like to do when we build out plans is throw in some big heavy-duty events like a big fat market crash a year after you retire, which is pretty much the worst timing possible. We also like to try out lame returns. So what does it look like if you get poorer returns for the rest of your life? Or really high inflation. I mean, not even that high, like just 4%. What does that look like over the long run? Or what if you live longer? We try out all these things and we see what it looks like if your plan were to suffer those things. And then we think about strategies for how to mitigate them if they were to happen. Now, I get it. This can be tricky without fancy software like we have. But there are things that you can do on your own, such as using extra conservative returns in your calculations. Basically, if you plan to have less returns than what you're actually expecting to get, then that will build in some natural buffer into your plan. You can also plan to live an extra long life. And basically what this looks like is just adding maybe 5-10 years to what you expect to live and see if you have enough assets to make it for that long. And another one that you can do is just simply plan for more income than you actually need each month. So what this does is actually builds up a safety buffer into your plan every month. I love this because you can actually use this excess to keep topping up your war chest that we talked about earlier. 13, consolidate RRSP accounts. Now, you don't have to do this, but I can tell you that if you don't do this, you will wish that you had. You see, when you're done putting money into an RRSP and are ready to start drawing an income out of it, what happens is you convert that RRSP into what is called a RIF account. And for each RIF account that you have, you will need to set up investment instructions and withdrawal instructions. And each RIF account will have withholding tax implications that you will need to track so that you can figure out if you're overpaying or underpaying tax for the year. And each RIF account will have its own tax slips too. So if you have a bunch of RRSP accounts, save yourself the headache and roll them into 1 or 2 at most, and then convert them into a RIF. Keep it simple. 14, find out if you can keep your health insurance. If you happen to have a health insurance package through work, you definitely want to look into what your options are for keeping it after you retire. Now, you may not want it, or you may not find that it's worth the cost, but if you have the option of keeping it, then it is probably the most cost-effective option that you're ever going to find. It's probably going to be way cheaper than trying to find a new plan later once you're retired. But again, as with most of these things that we talked about today, you just want to make sure that you know your options in advance. And that, folks, is a wrap.